I think imprecision is way undervalued. I think efficiency sometimes is way overrated. And what do I mean by imprecision? I mean estimation, I mean approximation. I think it's important to have these intuitive abilities to make sense of the world. And so I'm on a little bit of a journey to add to that, you might say, add to the imprecision of the world, which in a way I think will make certain things clearer. I'm going to start with a humble example, which is a dozen eggs. A dozen is a great number. If you look at most in most agricultural cultures, before everybody got in the cities and all that, there's a reason why we chose a dozen. Because you can do great things with a dozen. You can serve 3 people evenly, 4 people, 2 people, 6 people evenly, and it's really great. But as we get more efficient, and I went to Ike, the supermarket here in Vilnius, and photographed how eggs often come now, which is in tens, which is very efficient, very practical, but really, unless you have a family of 5, even if each of you and your partner always want to have 2 eggs, then at the end of the week you have 2 left over. And so, by the way, this is very stressful taking these pictures because I felt like the Edward Snowden of eggs because everybody thought it was very suspicious that I was doing this. But so then I took a picture of this because naturally people realized that 6 is a better number than 10 when it comes to eggs. And in fact, in Lithuania, you are so evolved that you have now you don't have a dozen eggs, but you have 2 six-packs of eggs. And I think that's very clever. Most cultures wouldn't have thought of that. So what I would say to you is that 10 is a very smart number for eggs, but 12 is a very wise number. And I think in this world today, we talk a lot about smart things, but we need wise things too. Take virtual reality. This is me. You can see I'm as engrossed as anybody is in a virtual reality device. It was totally cool. If I designed this, I know the guy who did, I'd be very proud of myself. And I would call this a very smart virtual reality. But again, here in your town, if you go to the Cathedral Square, there's another kind of virtual reality. And what's beautiful about this virtual reality is that in the plaza, there are these red stones. And if you just whisper in the ear of the friend that you're with that these stones represent the first city walls of the city of Vilnius, a whole era comes to life for them. They imagine another vision of the city. And again, I would say that is wise virtual reality. And I think one of the challenges today is that with GPS and all that, everybody knows exactly where they are, but nobody knows roughly where they are. Because you don't need to, you just look at the thing. And I think that this idea of approximation and imprecision is an important one. And I enjoy looking, and it's something that kids know very well. When a kid plays with a box, they know it's a box and they know it's a boat at the same time. They're not dumb, they're not confused, they're not like, well, we're worried about our child, they think this box is a boat. No, they know it's both at the same time. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could explore the world and you could conjure up an alternative universe for yourself as you went through it. And so I started creating stories that I thought would maybe wrap around the planet in a certain kind of way. And so what I do is I go from place to place and install markers and historic sites that honor events from a parallel world and our world. So if you were walking by this river, which is in Grand Rapids, you would come down and you would see this little point of contact. You would see this marker, and it would tell you about a handful of small stones, because the creation story of this culture in the parallel world was one that certain people toss stones in the water, and if you can slow down time enough, those stones become an archipelago of islands. And so if you go to that city today, first you have to brush off the snow, so I'll do that for you, and you would read that story. And the great thing about reading is a very strange activity, because what happens is that you conjured up for yourself. You see what you're reading, even though you're not really seeing it. It's not there in front of you. And so language is and we'll talk about this more in a bit. So far we have about 100 sites, over 100 sites in 22 countries. And they are all interrelated in different kinds of ways. And what you're looking at now is a map of our world. And then this is a map of the parallel world. And you can see it has a certain, now I assume that most of you learned about this in school, right? No? Man, we'd worked out this whole thing where, it was going to be on the TEDxVilnius app, but then they said it was already covered in the school system here, so I apologize. So I may have to cover some ground. So the name of the project is Kcymaerxthaere, and can you pronounce it? All right, I'll help you out. So it's Kcymaerxthaere, and it's the name of this world. It comes from the cognate word chimera, which means the true physicality of the planet, and xthaere, which is a shape with almost an infinity of dimensions or sides, infinity minus 29 to be exact. And all the places are connected to other places. No place is connected to every other one. We've installed markers in many places. This one's in Dubai, in Singapore. There's one in a little town in West Texas called Ranger. We have some in Berlin, a whole constellation of them, in an old maltery. And it's been a pretty rewarding experience there. We give tours because you need to be guided around this world sometimes. We even have one in Vienna, in a mountain just outside of town. In Namibia, there's one in this really beautiful forest that's on the border between Belarus and Poland. It's the Białowież forest, which is the oldest. The last fragment of the forest that was here in Europe before people started coming here and evolving civilizations and starting to destroy the environment and all that. And this is a site in the UK, beautiful countryside. And they're not all just markers. They're sometimes forms and shapes and much larger installations. This one's in the Flinders Ranges of Australia. And I call attention to this one because you see the flowers there? And what I mean by estimation and approximation being important, I don't know if you've ever tried to use a field guide for flowers. And has anyone done that? Yeah? Where you try to identify flowers out in the field or animals or anything like that. What you notice is that if you have a field guide that's filled with photographs, it's not nearly as useful as a field guide that has drawings. Because the drawings get to the idea of the flower. Whereas when you see a photograph of a flower, you're trying to say match it exactly to the one that's in the field. And there are always little tiny differences, and you wonder, it's like when people people who live in a city argue with the Google map about whether they should take one route or another. And you're always a little bit afraid, right? To be the person who says, don't trust Google, because you know you're going to be wrong that time, even though you're right most of the time. And so there's this whole intimidation we have about precision. And I'm not against precision, I'm not against science or anything like that, but there's a beauty to kind of relaxing into an approximation and an imprecision in the world. So as I was saying, we have these markers. Sometimes this one's made out of concrete and it tells a story. And I think you can see the word leave the battlefield. So when you hear the phrase leave the battlefield or you read it there, you imagine something. And every one of you imagines something different. And I want to show you, in a way, just a simple example of how hardwired we are for language. So this is red, blue, purple, brown, yellow, green, etc. And now I'm going to show you this one. And you're a little bit of laughing, and I saw a little bit of twitching. And there's something uncomfortable about seeing green written in red, and you've just seen how it should be done, which is red written in red, and now green is written in red, and it's in the same place, and you know that they're somehow the same, but they're not. And that's how, because color is something we perceive instantly, and the language is something we perceive instantly. And it's really kind of a powerful thing to bring that out into the world. So we've actually installed one of these markers here in Vilnius, in Užupis, and this was an installation we did a couple years ago. So I have to tell you a little bit of the story. And the story that happens here has to do with a kid named the Boy from the Sea. And he actually grew up, but everybody called him the Boy from the Sea even after that. And the thing about him is that he loved making sandcastles, sand cities actually. And his mother would always tell him to be careful for the waves. And he would not listen to her, of course. And one day a terrible wave came and he had no place to escape except for to dive into his own sandcastle, which is not much protection. So then he dove further between the grains of sand and entered a whole new universe. And he ended up at some point, as you do, according to Linus, in Vilnius when you enter a new universe. And so he ended up here, and he wandered actually all around the world. He went to Armenia, what we call Armenia. And so we installed the marker here because this was a place that he encountered a woman named Ning, whose voice was so beautiful that it could not be hidden. And but she had one problem, which is that she discovered she witnessed a murder. And so the bad guys were after her, and every time she tried to hide, she eventually would sing. And of course, when they heard her voice, they knew it could only be her. So part of the story happened here at this spot, where she recognized the boy from the sea, didn't know exactly who he was, but trusted him to help him save her life. So it was very appropriate to be in a beautiful place like Užupis, which not everybody knows of this amazing republic, which is right here, and they have a constitution, and this beautiful constitution that starts, everyone has the right to live by the river Vinel, and the river Vinel has the right to flow by everyone. And I think that's very equitable. And so there's, when I go to places and try to explain this project, different things happen. This is a site that we did in what we call Armenia. And it was really an amazing experience. And I was trying to explain these things to the community there, and they were quite open to it and excited, and this idea of being connected to places around the world through story. But the mayor was a very practical man, a great guy, and he said, and I said, well, it helps you see the things that aren't there. And he said, well, good question. He said, well, who cares what's not there? And I said, well, think about it. Everything in your life that's most important to you, your family, your career, your relationships, in his case, even the whole independent country of Armenia, all these things didn't exist before they did. So what's not there is actually really important, even though people are always beating us over the head and telling us to be realistic and focus on what's in front of you. Well, actually, the things that are not yet in front of you that are sometimes the most important. And when he heard that, he goes, well, that makes sense. And they gave me permission to do this installation. And it turned out beautifully, and we brought stones from all over, and you can see different carvings that we did there. And this is actually the location where the singer, Ning, saved the boy from the sea when he was caught in a flood. He was caught in a flash flood, and she sang so beautifully that the water turned into soft, cushiony stones, and that cushioned his impact when he fell out of the gorge. And that's where this happened. So you can travel the world and see these different places and encounter the story and conjure it up for yourself. But of course, it wouldn't be such a nice thing if you could only experience by traveling. And the point is that it's locally facing as well as facing to the outside world. So the other thing that I enjoy very much about it is, again, this idea of approximation. So this is the site, and we asked this wonderful painter to paint his version of it. And you see that the painting tells you something different than the photograph, which tells you something different than the movie. And this is something that we all know from religious drawing. I mean, anytime you have a lot of people painting the same thing based on the same story, there's a connection that's beyond the style, that's beyond the image. You don't need to be. There's not a brief that tells people how to paint the Virgin Mary. And you could do. I could be showing pictures of the Ganesh, the same thing. So one of the things we do with Kcymaerxthaere is that we do the disputed likenesses, where we ask people to draw their interpretation of the stories. And then we don't give them the drawings, the postcard. I mail that postcard to the last group that we did it with. We call these disputed likenesses. And we did it with a group of kids in Kcymaerxthaere. And in fact, if you go out into the area there, you'll see a tile that we've made, because we're going to actually use their tiles to surround the installation when we do it in Kcymaerxthaere. And these are some of their drawings. You can see the boy from the sea's sandcastle in this one, and you can see him out in the water, and you can see the singer singing. And all these, and yet there's no one right answer. It doesn't take away your permission to give your own right answer to this. This is a vision of the tower, and yet another, and all these things are their interpretations of the story, but they don't take away from yours. It's like when you read a book and you argue with your friends about what actor they used in the movie, and you're usually outraged. And we did this in Indonesia. Actually, the drawings from the kids in Kcymaerxthaere are being sent to the kids in Indonesia, and it's not just for kids. And so this is the whole group. This is in Indonesia at the school. They gathered around and they saw their work in the tiles around a story from a parallel world from some crazy guy from California. And yet it's a point of connection. It's because stories are so important to all of us. One of the stories of Kcymaerxthaere has to do with this language. It's called the shape language. It's called Nielvate. And basically, they're biologically, and I'm surprised Monty didn't mention this, but they're biologically aquatic people that live under the water, but they live in areas that have oxygen vents, so they can actually breathe the water. But we all know from being kids that it's very hard to talk underwater. You just go, right? I mean, there are very few productions of Shakespeare underwater, and there's a reason. So the people of these cultures learned to telepathically create shapes, which were their words. And so we installed them in this place. And people always ask me, are your stories based on the place? And I would never presume to understand the history of Lithuania and make a story about it. But I can presume to add a story, to wrap a story around the world. And so, but I used to say that it has nothing to do with the local history or the local place. But actually, I've learned that once these markers are there, they become part of the history, part of the story. And I just show these images of this one that we did recently in the middle of the U.S. in Indiana, where the site has become flooded. It was in a floodplain, and when you see the way the water and the landscape has worked on it, it's a beautiful thing to say. And how can I say that it's not part of that place? And now the grass is growing up, and it's part of this parallel universe is part of the cycle of life in New Harmony. And this language is being scattered around the world. And this irregular pentagon means reflection in this world. And so now I see that everywhere. This is in Sydney, where the people were working, and this is at a place in the U.S. at the bottom of a path. So I've come to realize that what I'm doing really is creating a sculpture that goes around the world. But it's a sculpture that's made out of narrative and story. And the thing about story is that it's very gossamer thin in a way, but there are actually few things more powerful than story. And so that's been my way of sort of, dealing with something that, it may not be really smart to travel around the world installing markers in every place, but I feel more and more as I meet more and more people and do it again and again that it's actually very, very wise. And you guys are going to help me take the next step, because I mentioned before that there was this question about the education system in Lithuania and the way they teach about Kcymaerxthaere, but I have come to learn that there is actually a song that you all learned as kids that's Kcymaerxthaere. So I need you to all stand up, because you're all going to sing now. And so here are the lyrics. Let's see. Oh, wait, no, they're not. There they are. So here are the lyrics. And is everybody ready? For the record, there were not a lot of yeses. So we're going to go. We have a few people in the audience who have refreshed their memory a little bit, so let's give it a shot. And go. These lyrics. Ilialak Vengor. We'll try the next verse. That was good. So it was warm up. So you did learn this in school. Good. You guys were too bashful. Too bashful. You're very shy people. So we'll start with the second verse on the screen. Nama temas, karet mira nelash, mala sata sala nemo nelash, mala sata sala nemoreto velash, ruka, klura lara mita, ilisa bamba, elsa bamba, yara ye getak. Excellent. You made my job easy. Good job. Thank you all for hearing me out. Thank you.